The UPA government has celebrated its second anniversary. A report card has been laid before the people of India. But is this government suffering from a midlife crisis? That's what we'll debate. We are joined by Senior Union Minister Salman Khurshid. With me in the studio, veteran political commentator and analyst Mr. Arun Shourie. With us also Leader of the Opposition in the Rajya Sabha, Mr. Arun Jaitley. I'll start with you, Mr. Shourie. If you begin by setting the grounds for this debate on this larger question of whether UPA 2 can be described as a failure.
Well, I feel, and I'm quite sad about it, but the fact is that the government has lost control over the situation. And secondly, the Prime Minister has lost control over the government. And Sonia Gandhi's authority is waning away in regard to the Congress. And this is certainly an ominous thing for the future. And I would presume that there is great resentment among allies, because all the allies of the party which were there in the first UPA one, as you remember, they have all been decimated. And the Congress has not been able to replace them. Others have replaced them, so there must be great turmoil within them. The opposition is not gaining from this because they probably are seen to be standing for the same thing. But as far as the UPA is concerned, certainly there is great cause for them to worry.
Mr. Khurshid, great cause for the UPA to worry. And on a larger note, the government at this time being considered a failure. The UPA 1 hasn't UPA 1 lived up to a certain expectation, set a certain standard. UPA 2 hasn't been able to live up to that. Analysts are saying this government, sir, is a failure.
Well, I imagine that anyone who wants to pass judgment 2 years into a 5-year term is themselves inviting the charge of making premature judgments. We have a sense and a feel of where we're going. We have some very, very, very enlightened and very powerful legislation still to come. I think we know the lay of the land. We've had a few hiccups. We've had some pitfalls, and those were unfortunate. We admit that they are unfortunate. The Prime Minister said so very categorically yesterday. We've learnt lessons, and we are trying to ensure that any of these things don't become impediments in the next 3 years. I don't think that it's fair to say we are a failure. I don't think any of the opinion polls are indicating that we are a failure, but they are certainly saying that there are things that still need to be done to improve our performance and certainly to improve our standing amongst the people. And we are way ahead of anybody else. That's not a consolation, but that's certainly a fact that one must keep in mind.
Okay, you're saying what the Prime Minister said, that yes, there are concerns about corruption, about governance, but the government is acting upon that. Let's go across now to Arun Jaitley. Mr. Jaitley, the Prime Minister said in his speech yesterday there have been developments relating to 2G, but the fact is the government is committed to taking corrective action. Do you believe that the arrests of A. Raja, Khani Modi show that here is a government that is serious about acting against corruption, no matter who the person is and how senior, how powerful he might be?
Well, recent events absolutely suggest the opposite. Now, they are trying to make a virtue out of what is a compulsion as far as they are concerned. Let's not forget that the 2G scam took place in 2007. On 10th January 2008, more than 3.5 years ago, the licenses were given. Now, the media, the opposition in parliament, various other groups have been protesting against this, that there's been unfairness, there's been corruption. This government did nothing. As late as 2010 in his Vigyan Bhavan press conference, the Prime Minister indicated that he virtually accepted Mr. Raja's explanation. It's only when a strong public opinion, a determined opposition in Parliament, media which was unearthing things since the Commonwealth Games, and then a very powerful institution like the Supreme Court came down on this government like a ton of bricks. It's only then that things started moving. But for all these pressures, nothing would have happened. But for the winter session of the Parliament being completely derailed, Mr. Raja may not have lost his ministership, let alone going to jail. Now, as a result of all these pressures, particularly the Supreme Court pressure, the CBI also realized that it was being watched and it had an accountability. And it's only then that these arrests have been taking place. Let's not be confused on this. These are not some voluntary actions of an executive which is extremely honest and which wants probity in public life.
Okay.
This was a compulsion upon this government that all the institutions were, in one sense, grouping against them, and the government had no option.
You're saying the government had no option, but I come to the second center stage face-off question for this evening. Has the Prime Minister redeemed himself by acting against the corrupt? Mr. Shourie, several senior leaders in the past have been accused of being corrupt. Never has such strict action been taken. Has this government redeemed itself in the eyes of the people by acting against people like Kani Modi and Raja?
No, but they have not acted. As Arun Jaitley was just explaining, you just look at the Prime Minister's statement. On the authority of Kapil Sibal, the new minister and their advocate in residence, he says that the Prime Minister was kept fully informed and did nothing. And the same thing is that if you see what the attitude of the UPA has been, you should see how the cases against their allies like Lalu Yadav or Mayawati or Mulayam Singh, they wax and wane according to their usefulness to the government. Is that a commitment to probity in public life? And I would also suggest that it was only when a meteor like the CAG, then followed up by the Supreme Court, that happened. And if I were in government, I would really reflect, is there a single government, Salman will tell us, a single government against whom the Supreme Court has felt compelled to pass such strong strictures week after week after week?
Mr. Khurshid.
Well, this is a little strange. If there is action against an ally, the credit goes to the Supreme Court. If there is no action against a so-called ally, then we are to blame. So why don't you just give the Supreme Court credit and blame at the same time? If something is not happening against another ally, then why don't you just blame the Supreme Court? Why don't you blame the Supreme Court then?
I completely agree with you that it is at last that the Supreme Court has taken this into account. You're right on that. But that does not absolve the government.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. The Supreme Court... No, it's not just that. We did very clearly say to the Supreme Court when we had options of doing other things, we said completely, let the Supreme Court supervise this, let the Supreme Court handle it. That's the best way to do it. And we would be happy if the Supreme Court handled every other matter as well. But I think in this country there is a concern about how much political institutions should handle things on their own rather than hand everything over to the judiciary. That's a concern that you and your parties have, and that's a concern that other people also have in this country. So let's not score points against each other and destroy the constitutional balance in this country.
No, please. I am for enforcing the constitutional balance, Salman. It is just that in the earlier cases, you are right, the Supreme Court was not as active as it should have been, but the government was certainly the initiator in diluting the cases, in not presenting them strongly enough, and then saying, oh, well, the court says this, that, or the other. And you just see what will happen in the coming months in regard to one or two of these persons when you need and do not need them, in the UP type people.
But Mr. Khurshid, you must respond to the point.
This is frankly...
That's being made.
I will. Okay. I will. But this is frankly a subjective assessment of what happens in politics. The bottom line is culpability and criminal responsibility. If we do not come through as far as culpability of any person is concerned and the responsibility that we owe to the nation, you can then question us. You can't anticipate that we will not do certain things. You can't say that we don't expect you to do something.
I am pointing to your record, Salman. You are talking like a lawyer. I am pointing to the record of the government on these cases in the past. And even in regard to Raja and this whole 2G case, I don't want to go into saying what I told the Prime Minister, etc., but it is a matter of record.
Yeah.
From his own letter, it is evident that he knew what was going on and did nothing. So, not about anticipation about the future. We should just say, okay, it was not done, let's do it now.
No, we will. This is what the Prime Minister said. And frankly, Prime Minister knowing one thing and Prime Minister actually knowing something is wrong within the ministry. I think there are two different things, but we are not talking about the details of the 2G incident. We are talking about what we intend to do. We know our responsibility. We will come through as far as we are concerned.
No, but Mr. Khurshid, Mr. Jaitley made the point that this government is making a virtue out of a necessity. It was compelled to act against these ministers and is now making that action seem as if one of the key cornerstones of its accomplishments, because that's what Sonia Gandhi said, that transparency, accountability, probity are the heart of this government. Our actions demonstrate this, even though over the last few months a lot has been said about the issue of corruption. We intend to act. The Prime Minister said something similar. So Mr. Jaitley making the point that this government is making a virtue out of a virtual necessity.
Well, I wish the BJP would make a virtue out of a necessity too, but they don't seem to be able to make a virtue out of a necessity. Or is there necessity to remain with the vice? I don't know. But here, how long are you going to keep harping about what happened in the past? Why don't you look at what we are doing now? Why don't you give us a chance to do something in the next 3 years, which is what the people have given us, and we will perform in the next 3 years.
All right, I now want to shift our attention to the second set of questions about the economic policy of this government. And I want to put this question first to Mr. Shourie. Has this government, sir, led by a brilliant economist, failed in displaying any economic vision? There's been zero forward movement on any of the major economic growth proposals.
On the reforms?
Yes.
Yes, on the growth, in spite of the governments, of many state governments, and because of some state governments, and in spite of the central government, growth has continued. That's because of the resilience of the Indian entrepreneur and worker.
But there's been no reform.
No reforms. I'll give you an instance, one thing after the other. In the financial sector, as having handled corporate affairs, Salman knows, Raghuram Rajan's report. You listen to the distress of the poor man who was asked to write the report. Nothing was done. On infrastructure implementation, just see what's happened on highways. Just see where the power sector reforms are. In higher technical education, see what the announcements were made and what has actually happened on the ground. On defense production, on police recruitment and training for anti-terrorist operations, which affects economic development in some of the richest states of India. On centrally sponsored schemes, what Chidambaram said in his budgets. On reforming the public distribution system, what he said in successive budgets and what has been done. There is just no... and unfortunately the media has not focused on it, because when the Prime Minister makes an announcement, administrative reforms, or Moily presents the report on the second Administrative Reforms Commission, people think that administrative reforms have been done.
Absolutely.
Right, and actually nothing has been done on the ground at all.
Mr. Khurshid, the 100-day agenda for UPA 2 included proposals like the right for food, physical infrastructure in rural areas, 6-lane highways, law and land acquisition, rehabilitation, judicial and police reforms. None of it has been acted on, leading to the former media advisor to the Prime Minister, Sanjay Baru, writing in the Business Standard that the second year of UPA 2 has been a virtual washout. This comes from someone who's been on the inside in this government. It just seems the maximum energy of this government is focused on crisis management, dealing with scams, containing damage, and not in pushing forward the economic growth agenda and the reform agenda, sir.
Well, I think that's fair. If you're going to get distracted by things going wrong, then a lot of the things that have to go right will suffer, undoubtedly. But also please remember that there is a reform plateau as well. There is a lot of stuff that is in the pipeline. A lot of legislation is now with standing committees, with select committees and so on. Now you can't simply have quick fixes when you're talking about reform. There are issues that have to go through procedural and substantive changes and scrutiny that's taking place. The food security bill we have promised is coming. We have promised that there's a new company law coming in the next, as far as the next session of Parliament is concerned. There's a huge step forward we will take for whatever be the background, but we will take a major step forward as far as the Lokbal bill is concerned. The Judicial Accountability bill is before the standing committee. There are a lot of legislation on revenue law which is coming, where consensus is being built up. You can't do a quick fix on any of these things because of the nature of Indian politics and the Indian system.
You're making
but please look at how far we are going.
You're making the point that there can be no quick fixes. Mr. Shauri, the Prime Minister, said the UPA has offered 7 years of political stability, social progress, communal harmony, economic growth and increased engagement with the nations around the world. It seems there's just so much negativity which gets harped upon and focused on that the positives of this government are being ignored.
As you said, he's such a great economist and he will remind us on inflation. Inflation today, Salman has not listed, is not the result of not having some laws. It is because of the deficits against which each of us in Parliament was pointing out what the consequences will be 3-4 years hence. Nothing was done, and now the limits of monetary policy have been reached, and as Mr. Pranab Mukherjee has himself acknowledged, the fiscal deficit targets are again not being met. Second thing I'll tell you, it's very bad for the future and will affect investment, is the return of arbitrariness. It's personified by my great friend and you said one of the tigers among our ministers, Jairam Ramesh. In investor conference after investor conference that I have to attend every 15 days, Salman, I'll tell you, this fear of the return of arbitrariness in decision making on POSCO. I have been confronted with questions on that, on Vedanta, on these big dams. On each one of these, clearance is given, then it is not given, then some other thing is slipped in. This is certainly a matter of concern, and these great economists and others should be worried about this. And as far as your point on legislation is concerned, that you have a great agenda on legislation, please believe me that the way the government is going about raising the pitch of confrontation in the PSC, in UP, believe me, you will not be able to get through these legislative proposals as you are, just because you have listed them or draft bills are ready. This is not going to happen.
Let Mr. Khurshid respond to that.
No, I will respond to that. I take that as very good advice from a very senior person, but it takes two hands to clap, and I think this country has to put its act together by saying, look, the government has a certain job to do and the opposition has a certain job to do, but there are lines that we must draw in the interest of the nation where we must converge and we must agree. Now we've made a special effort to reach consensus as far as the land acquisition bill is concerned, and I hope that in the next session you will find an outstanding, modern, contemporary land acquisition bill that will satisfy a huge number of constituencies. But there is a problem today in our country. There are very sharply divided constituencies outside politics as well. There is the tribal constituency, there is the wildlife constituency, there is the local constituency, and there is the growth constituency. I think if you just read Jairam Ramesh's lecture, The Hedgehog and the Fox, you will know what a difficult job he has to do. And of course, sometimes you may feel disappointed, sometimes you may feel excited, depending on what your perspective is. But I do believe that he has a very tough job, and we shouldn't just assume that because he's having to take tough decisions, therefore everybody is going to say, okay, no investment in India. People know India has problems. India needs to move forward.
You know, it's really not about Jairam. I was illustrating the matter, Salman, and the task of leadership, there are always constraints, the kinds that you have listed. You call them constituencies. There can be opportunities as well as roadblocks. But the task of leadership is to steer the policy framework and implementation through these difficulties. You can't just sit back and say, oh, these are tough decisions, therefore whether we agree or not, the kinds of things that you have just so nicely and eloquently said on behalf of a mutual friend.
Well, I believe that that's what we are trying to do, and I do believe that we don't get the kind of support you should get in a democracy from the opposition. You can't put Parliament to rest. You can't protest to the extent of saying Parliament will not function for a whole session. I think that's a little bit unfair, and you have to admit that's a little bit unfair.
That's a good point to make to my namesake Arun Jaitley, not me.
Okay, let's go across to Mr. Arun Jaitley. He's been listening intently. We're analysing the performance of the UPA in its 2 years. But government managers say while there are certain issues that the government needs to deal with, the BJP itself is not doing particularly well. If you look at the election results in Assam, which was a big hope for your party, you failed miserably. Your tally has come down to half. If you look at the recent AC Nielsen survey, which marks the second year of this government, it shows the UPA is coming down, but the BJP is currently in no position along with its allies to form the next government. So yes, the opposition, yes, the government is facing problems, but the opposition has its own set of problems to deal with, Mr. Jaitley.
Well, let's be very clear. We can live in a fool's paradise and invent certain logics. The highest we've ever got in Assam is 10 MLAs till today. This time we did badly, we've got 5. But then I could compare this with the single digit that Congress has got in Tamil Nadu. I could compare it with the 4 seats that Congress got in Bihar in the recent elections. So there's no point picking up areas where the parties are weak. Look at most of our state governments which are being run. Some of the best governments in this country are being run by the BJP and the NDA. That apart, the big message of the recently concluded assembly elections is, it was the 4 southern states which contributed in putting Congress to power at the center. Now, if you were to interpolate the results of Karnataka and Assam assemblies and the by-election in the Lok Sabha, and read along with that the election of the assembly results in Kerala and in Tamil Nadu, the Congress probably would be minus 45 Lok Sabha seats in the southern states itself. Where are the areas that it's going to gain? It was these states, particularly the 3 states in the south, Kerala, Tamil Nadu and Andhra, along with Rajasthan, which was a major contributory to this government, formation at the center. Even Rajasthan, the hopes for the Congress after the recent Panchayat elections have indicated, are actually nosediving down.
But
therefore, there's a lot which they have to consider. I quite concede that the BJP, in order to have its aspirations of coming to power at the center, we need to expand the NDA, and that's something which is high up on our agenda.
But Mr. Jaitley,
but at the same time, the results don't present a very rosy picture for the Congress
but
either.
Mr. Jaitley, on the key issue of corruption, which is the sledgehammer you used to bang this government with, your party is accused of serious hypocrisy. You're making a big deal of the charges against Kanimodi and Raja, but your chief minister in Karnataka, against whom there have been several public pronouncements, there are several allegations, your party continues to protect him. You know, you're assuming this high moral ground when it comes to accusations against Congress leaders or leaders from the allies, but you don't seem to follow the same standards yourself, sir.
First of all, let me tell you, Rahul, you are factually wrong even in the phrasing of your question. First of all, the action against Kanimoi and A. Raja is an involuntary action. It's not taken place because of a Congress government. It's taken place in spite of their best efforts to shield them. Secondly, you are again wrong when you say there are court orders of Lokayukt. Lokayukt at times gives press interviews and television interviews where he may make a comment. I am yet to come across a single order against him as far as the courts are concerned, or even the Lokayukt is concerned. Press interviews, we are not a banana republic where statements made by either anchors or journalists or even individuals holding high offices to the media itself becomes a substitute for proof. The moment there is some evidence given against any one of our leaders, we always act. But the fact is, we can't act on basis of merely allegation, which in any case has not even been
but in the
substantiated.
past, Mr. Jaitley, a leader as senior as L.K. Advani has stepped down, taking moral responsibility, saying till the charges are proven to be untrue, he will step down. It seems you expect a very high set of standards from the Congress, demand immediate resignations, but you're not prepared to follow what your own leader did in the past and really set that as an example.
Well, there was a charge sheet filed against him, if you remember, by the CBI. Today, you have a situation in this country where some allegations are being made. The allegations have to be substantiated by any authority whatsoever. You had a motivated sanction being granted by the governor. You know how the Karnataka governor has been behaving. Now, on basis of that motivated action of a Karnataka governor, we start sacrificing our chief ministers in the absence of any independent authority coming to a finding. I think we are not going to weaken our party unnecessarily, but if there is any authority or any investigation which comes to a particular view on this subject, the party will certainly act.
Okay.
That's a moral high ground. The moral high ground is not that merely because an opponent makes an allegation, you get out of the field itself.
Okay.
That is the definition of a moral high ground, which I am not willing to
So
accept.
you're making the case that in case allegations are proven against Mr. Yedurappa, you will ask him to step down as Chief Minister. I now want to take the discussion in the direction of whether this government will last out its full term. So will the UPA to last its full term? We'll start with Mr. Arun Shah.
It may last, but if it lasts in this form, then it would be doing great harm to the country itself, because the prospect seems to be there's sort of uncertainty about the Prime Minister. He cannot be replaced, and at the same time everybody will keep waiting for him to at last act. And so, similarly, so long as it is evident to people, even if it is by imputation, Salman, that Mrs. Sonia Gandhi's singular objective is to find a place at the top for Mr. Rahul Gandhi, then her authority will continue to weaken, and her hold on the party and her authority over it will continue to weaken in this. And therefore the prospects will really turn, for the Congress itself will turn on what the individual chief ministers in the states do, as they are doing, for instance, for the BJP.
No, but and in that, Mr. Khurshid, if you would look
for
at
instance,
the performance...
if I may just give
Yes,
you one
please.
example, I live in Maharashtra these days, and in even a good person like Mr. Prithviraj Chauhan is actually, his work is invisible. So that is what is going to count, and that's another factor which is going to affect the effectiveness of the government.
And it was
here.
states like Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu
Yes.
which gave the UPA the propellant which took them to power in Delhi, and that's where the government is losing ground currently. Mr. Khurshid, Mr. Shauri making the point that even if the government manages to last out its full term, unless it gets its act in order, it's really pointless. You know, there's no energy, there's no forward movement. The government is accused of being in drift. Is this the way things will change? Is this the way things will stay, or do you see them change, sir?
Well, I think if you just go over the Prime Minister's speech yesterday, you will see a sense of direction and determination. And we know that we have to perform, that we have to deliver, and we know that after UPA 2, we look forward to UPA 3. As far as my friend Mr. Arun Shori has talked about Mr. Rahul Gandhi, he had the Prime Ministership for the asking. Here is a young man who's saying, let me do some work on the ground, let me discover what I can do for this country. And I think one should give him credit for this. He repeatedly has said we have an outstanding Prime Minister. Please don't speculate about the Prime Minister. And I think this is something which is outstanding and very good and very wholesome for our country. Now let's just go by this.
Well, you know, Salman, actually in all this process, what the worst thing that is going to happen, and it is happening, is the undermining of institutions. It's not Rahul Gandhi or the Prime Minister, but you just see, you are a constitutional scholar, as to what has happened to the principle of collective responsibility by what kinds of things are happening among ministers, public statements, and so on. The authority of the Prime Minister over the cabinet, the emergence of another center of power like this National Advisory Council, all these things. What happened in regard to the CVC, these are institutions which will get affected, they are getting affected and undermined by negligence, maybe not by design, but by this evaporation of the control over government, you will see, and of the institutions of governance. All this is going to happen, effect. And an even worse thing, if I may just mention one thing, is the situation on security. It's not going to be wished away. The Prime Minister himself, you keep quoting his speeches that direction. Please see the speeches he has made in the last 7 years. Each of them had a direction. But they were speeches of a consultant to the government. Similarly, on national security, see the speeches Mr. Chidambaram made, and actually a good offensive was begun after 5 disastrous years of Mr. Shivraj Patil. But after those 2 incidents in May and June last year, 55 people blown up, security personnel, then 28 personnel blown up. After that, that offensive has come to a stop to such an extent that the CRP established a regional headquarters in Raipur and shifted it to Calcutta, saying For security reasons, we can't continue.
But Mr. Khurshid, that's an important question. The fact that Mr. Chidambaram spoke about the need for a NAT grid 17 months ago, for the fact that for the last 4 months, the report of the National Intelligence Grid project report has been ready. The CCS hasn't found time to discuss it, leading to the accusation that this government has taken its foot off that accelerator of internal security reform. You're almost waiting for another 26/11-like attack to take place, Mr. Khurshid.
Nobody's waiting. And please see the record of the last 1 year, whatever happened a year ago, but please look at the record of last 1 year. And please, if you like, talk to Mr. Chidambaram in detail, and he will tell you how far he's already moved. He has. He's got his hands-on
Sir,
approach.
the report has been ready for 5 months, Mr. Khurshid. The project report
I know,
hasn't
but
been
you
discussed by the
can't
CCS. After the fiascos of the names going wrong, the 2 names, the 30th of May has been chosen as the date when the CCS will discuss this. Why did we wait for a crisis to unfold before CCS gave time for this discussion, sir?
I'll give you, this is symptomatic, Salman. Don't defend them in a court. I'll give you an example.
No, I'm not defending. Yeah,
Just as on this question of the National Intelligence Grid, it's a very small symptom. I give you another example. Just ask Mr. Chidambaram for the figures on training on anti-terrorist operations. What has happened to them? They were trained. Are they deployed in Dantwara and other places, or are they sitting in state capitals eating, food? Just you take the Ministry of Defence. The Prime Minister knows. The Prime Minister knows, my friend, the dissatisfaction in the army because weapon systems also have got so far delayed that in the case of the field gun, after 5 rounds of trials, the main supplier has walked out. 5 rounds of trials over 23 years, and no decision has been possible for Mr. Antony or anyone to take.
Let Mr.
I could
Khurshid
give you
respond
20
to these
examples.
multiple allegations of failures on internal security, Mr. Khurshid.
No, I'm sure that you could give many examples, but these are not examples that you can talk about in the public with details of security dimensions. I would certainly not be able to talk about them, nor would I want to talk about them. But I can assure you that this is of a highest priority for us. We've got our best man working on this job, but we do have the history of purchases as far as weapons are concerned. We know has been a very uncomfortable history. And therefore, if people are cautious and careful, you can't blame them. And this is what we want in this country. We don't want a system that will ensure that nobody takes decisions.
For 7 years, you don't take a decision on field guns, my friend.
And then Bofors pulls out.
Yeah, not only Bofors, BAE, which now owns Bofors, they pull out. And it is not just on Bofors. There are several such examples I could give you from the defense forces themselves, even on weapon systems. We're not thinking of alliance systems. We are not thinking of intelligence, external intelligence. Even the simplest part of the defense component, I assure you, Salman, that while you have the best man on the job in internal security, on external security, we are not doing enough, and we are setting ourselves up for great difficulties some years hence.
Well, I'm very happy to have your advice on that, and I would pass it on. But I am telling you that we know what we have to do, and that we are doing it. I think the advances that we've made, the successes that we've had on the international platforms, I think have a lot to do with the work that's being done. But obviously, a lot of defense-related issues can't be talked about transparently in a program like this.
Okay. Let's go across to Mr. Arun Jaitley on the issue of whether this government will last out its full term. The Prime Minister seems intent, and the government's top managers seem intent on bringing governance back on track. They're saying, wait for the monsoon session, we'll give this government new thrust. Do you see that happen? Do you see this government last its full term, sir?
There's a complete drift. I don't know what was the occasion to celebrate this anniversary, because the last 1 year has been a nightmarish year as far as this government is concerned. It's a year this government should have ordinarily liked to forget. But still they want to make a virtue out of a disaster. Then they can continue to celebrate this as an anniversary. Now, if this government were to last another 5 years, another 3 years, which is their balanced term, well, God help us, because what's happening as far as corruption is concerned, what's happening to Naxalism, the issue of Telangana is hanging fire, Kashmir is virtually stagnant where it was, And then on the economic front, the government is not able to take many decisions.
Okay, Mr. Shourie, what is your final advice to the government? Do you see it last its full term?
Well, it may or may not last, but if you want to last a full term, Salman, please do not delude yourself that you can, because you can manage the media through some journalists or some editors or owners, because you can manage the parliament through some great friends on all sides. Even Mr. Rajiv Gandhi having 3/4 of the parliament, the situation outside Delhi, outside the parliament is really going out of hand. And unless the government, and especially that means unless you begin by energizing the cabinet itself, and this can only be done by the Prime Minister, my friend, we'll just keep having these debates and things will continue to go the way they are going now.
Mr. Khurshid, your response will be the last word on the show. What's being done? Where is this booster dose coming from?
Mr. Arun Shouri's good wishes for the Prime Minister will go to their target. The Prime Minister is determined and intends to give you a good government for the next 3 years, and he'll keep in mind, I'm sure, what Mr. Arun Shouri has to say.
Well, is the government living up to what it promised? Is this government a failure? We leave it ultimately to our viewers and to the voters to decide. But for this cracking debate, Mr. Arun Shouri, Mr. Arun Jaitley and Salman Khurshid, thank you very much for joining us to discuss the midterm crisis of the UPA government, the second anniversary being celebrated. We'll continue tracking the story very closely. News and updates continue when we return. Stay with us. Thank you very much.